And Shermin, I don't want to bury the lead. I want to get right into it because I'm actually a little bit angry about something. And that
Okay.
is Ahmadinejad's arrest in Iran. It was hardly, if at all, covered in US or Canadian media. I just didn't see it. Please tell me about that arrest because people need to know about it.
Sure, absolutely. It's interesting because it really does tie into the upcoming elections. So I don't know how much detail you want me to go into, but as far as the arrest itself, it happened in late April and it was essentially 7 hours of detainment. What happened is Ahmadinejad was on his way to meet with the supreme leader, or so he thought, and his contact with his security team was disconnected, and three other cars joined the convoy, and they instructed the lead car to take a different direction. And instead of being taken to the supreme leader's office, Ahmadinejad was taken to a secret location in one of the buildings belonging to the foreign ministry, but that is actually under the control of the Revolutionary Guard's intelligence unit. And, you can just imagine the scene. He arrives, he exits the car, there's a confrontation between his security team and the guards members that were there. And the guards members, the Revolutionary Guards members, disarmed his team and took their communication equipment, confiscated them. And then Ahmadinejad was forced to enter the office building. And he was questioned and interrogated, and, for hours. And it's a confirmed incident by several news sources, including The Guardian. But of course, the main Iranian Islamic press has denied that this happened. But it is a confirmed incident, and what really led up to it is earlier the regime's media outlet reported that, and it was this happened in late April, so it was just days before the registration of the final presidential candidates for the upcoming June 14th elections. Ahmadinejad warned several people that if his hand-picked candidate to succeed him was rejected as a candidate, that he would reveal tapes that will show the regime defrauded the voters in the 2009 presidential elections. There's been rumors of these tapes that apparently prove that millions of votes were added in favor of Ahmadinejad himself, of course, for him to be able to win the 2009 elections, which your listeners, being as sophisticated as they are, might remember was widely reported to have been a rigged election, with the top Green Movement candidate losing, even though most people believed he actually was the winner. It led to tremendous numbers of protests, which then led to a crackdown by the regime, and lots of arrests and even death sentences and torture and lots of other unpleasantries. So a lot of this is basically leading up to the June 14th elections, and the fact that Ahmadinejad is not able to run. He is the sitting duck incumbent. This is his second term. And he really just wanted his own hand-picked successor to at least not be rejected as a candidate by the regime. And so he started to make these threats. And that's what led to the arrest.
It's astonishing to me that this wasn't loudly and widely reported.
Yeah.
Uh, you have, I mean, somebody should really send a note to John McCain to calm down with, John McCain famously joked, if you call it a joke, of bomb, 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 bomb Iran. And to see that there is a struggle within Iran, that it's not a monolith.
Right.
It's much more complex than that. And it's astonishing to me. As a former journalist, I'm frequently disappointed by journalists. But my first question is kind of less about Iran and more about the media, and that is, how is it that the media didn't report that, do you think?
I mean, it was reported, but not widely. I think. I mean, I think it's very easy to be critical of the United States media and the Canadian press as well. The Western European media is much better, And the readers of The Economist, for example, or readers of the BBC tend to get much, much better international news, much more in-depth news. There is, as I'm sure your listeners are aware, NPR, National Public Radio in the United States, that does tend to really dig in and provide more in-depth news. But as a general matter, what's really happened to the media, and I don't think it has to do with conservative politics or progressive politics or anything like that, but rather it's just television as a forum no longer allows for in-depth reporting. And the newspapers aren't really interested in it. It's too difficult and they don't have enough money. So most people nowadays get their news from blogs, which which can be great. I mean, you can have cool people podcasts and you can have, these amazing blogs. There are some that I read that are very, very informative. But of course, part of the problem with that is bloggers are not journalists and they're not reporters. They're not trained. They're not on the ground covering anything. So getting like actual news is difficult. In addition to that, people aren't really that interested in it. I think that the vast majority of people, and it's again very easy to be critical, but I think the vast majority of people get up in the morning, they try to get their kids out the door, they try to go to the office, they try to figure out how to make it to the ballet recital. They might have 10, 15 minutes for the news a day, and most of that comes from the little television that's in their office elevator that they watch on the way up to their offices. So I think the media responds to their consumers, and if we could get people to be more interested in in-depth news and in-depth reporting, I think we would see the media responding to that. But of course, it is a chicken and an egg problem as well. It's not there, so people don't see it, so then they're not as interested in it.
I can see the budgetary concern. I mean, there's far fewer foreign correspondents than there used to be.
Yeah.
On the other hand, well, I'm actually reminded of the 2008 election with Obama, where the president of the United States, the president-elect, what I frequently heard was, we don't really know enough about him. And I think at that point he'd written 2 autobiographies. And it's just, when I hear somebody say, we don't know him, we don't know enough about him, we have the internet, which allows us to have much more access to much more information than we ever had. I don't think we have any excuses. I mean, I guess my short answer to this is people need to be listening to Democracy Now! More,
Yeah.
the podcast Democracy Now!, and a whole lot less to Honey Boo Boo, I guess. I don't know.
I mean, I think that's exactly right. There definitely has been a deterioration of real culture in Canada and the United States, and it is a really unfortunate thing to see because, and it's Honey Boo Boo and that type of television programming is certainly far more pervasive than in-depth news programming or anything that has to do anything with anything significant or important. Another culprit is sports in America, and I'm not trying to knock down athletes or athleticism or sports or sporting events, which can be really amazing and wonderful and great things, but the United States is really unique in its obsession with sports. I mean, you go elsewhere in the world and you see, sure, people in Europe are really obsessed with soccer, or people in Canada are really obsessed with hockey. But in the United States, it's one season after another after another. It's the baseball and the football and the basketball and the hockey, and everything is just so consuming, and so it takes so much time to watch all these events and then to discuss them, and then you go to bars and you sit with your friends and then you drink and then you talk about the events, and that's it. I mean, that's what you do for fun. You don't really read anymore. You certainly don't attend the opera or an art museum, and you don't attend cultural events. And there really has been a deterioration in the thirst for any sort of real knowledge. And so what we end up getting is just headlines and snippets of news. Having said that, I've also started to see a little bit of a pushback and a revolution in that regard. I mean, in Chicago alone, we now host a humanities festival, an ideas week, a TEDx, several different international film festivals. We have several cultural centers. Now, of course, we are, a big urban area and have a lot of resources to devote to these
You
things.
are in Chicago, yeah.
Yeah, in Chicago. Yeah, and Chicago is starting to become a little hub for the intelligentsia, which is and it's really started to actually take over in New York, I think, in that respect. Um, but at least there is this pushback out there, and people like you who are, creating these podcasts and speaking vocally and actively about the need to actually pay attention to the things that matter and then the details of the things that matter, because people aren't going to lose, thousands or hundreds of thousands of people aren't going to lose their lives, and billions of dollars aren't going to be lost because of a sports team. But that certainly does get a lot more attention.
Well, sometimes it feels like a bit of trying to empty the ocean with a teacup. One of my former guests was Masno El Masiki, who, as a musician, he tries to be a ambassador for both Somalia and Baltimore. And now my podcast is probably banned in Somalia, so
I think that's a good thing. I think you should get a gold star every time your podcast is banned in an aggressive conservative country. You should get a gold star.
But I wonder, we're so connected to sports competition. I feel that a bit in myself when I watch politics, because I don't watch Canadian politics. I find Canadian politics generally to be pretty boring.
Well, your mayor's the Toronto mayor's got himself involved in some really interesting things.
Well, yeah, kind of, but I don't know if that'll actually go anywhere. And it just seems to me that if they're going to make that stick, they better make it stick fast. Otherwise, he's going to wriggle out. But I do tend to, when I look at Republicans and Democrats, I think of that as kind of a sport, I suppose, because I'm as a Canadian, I watch that as like people watch sports teams, because it doesn't really affect me directly. But maybe that's part of the problem, is there's this feeling of disconnection. If people saw or felt or understood how American foreign policy could affect them personally, and beyond their tax burden, because when you think of tax burden, that's generally pennies, but for each individual. But actually, that might be an underestimation. But how do you feel U.S. foreign policy trickles back or blows back to Americans so they do get that connection?
How do I think it happens now, or how do I think it could be changed so that they get the connection a little bit better?
How do you think it happens now?
I think really one of the problems is America is so powerful and so wealthy, and therein, of course, lies the greater responsibility, I believe, upon each individual in a participatory democracy that is the most powerful in the world, to be more informed. Having said that, because we're all so comfortable, right? I mean, the state of comfort that people in, the poorest of the poor here, who I'm not trying to pretend that they don't live in a state of poverty, but it's nothing compared to the poverty that the rest of the world lives. I mean, they still have, things that the kings and queens of 100 years ago didn't have, like indoor plumbing, or vehicular transportation, or cellular telephones, or access to all kinds of educational benefits. So when you reach that level of comfort, I think you tend to tune out anything that is beyond your immediate sphere of the universe. And because the United States, as an imperialist nation, its main foreign policy goal, and it doesn't really matter, I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but in this respect, it doesn't matter who is in office. The main foreign policy goal of the United States is to maintain its position as a global leader, both in terms of security and in terms of economic wealth. And that's probably the goal of every nation. I mean, every nation is trying to be as economically wealthy as they can be while maintaining security, both within their borders and outside of their borders. It's just that the United States happens to be, at the top of the pyramid there right now. So I think as long as people don't feel threatened, both in terms of their economy and in terms of their safety, they don't care. And it's not just that they don't care about whether Ahmadinejad got arrested. I don't think they care about the black kids being killed on the southwest side of Chicago. If it's not affecting their personal security, and their personal sort of financial well-being, which the two are obviously very interrelated. So in other words, I guess what I'm saying is, I think instability is probably the best way to get people to care, but that's obviously not something you want to wish for. So, I mean, I guess in an ideal world, you just would want to try to shout and educate. And I actually think cultural programmings are a terrific way to get people to care. You and I were discussing this before we went live on the podcast, but one of the things that a few of us here in Chicago have tried to do is form an organization that's geared towards exchanging art and culture between Iran and the United States. And if you present programming to audiences who, as a general matter, are good human beings and are interested, even though they might not be as interested as you or I are, um, about normal people somewhere else in the world, an artist or a musician, or somebody who's trying to put a wedding together, or somebody having a baby, and just present these sort of human stories through the arts, because the arts do have this magical ability to capture our imagination and all of our imaginations, and make it interesting, and thereby create that sort of human connection, which we are so able to do in today's global world. Then I think you do get people interested. I mean, we have people coming to our events, they watch a film about the underground music scene in Iran, and they learn about the jazz and rap and heavy metal and hard rock that's being created in Persian and then being distributed through underground channels in Iran. And that's a fun story. That's an interesting story. And that's not me calling anybody tyrannical. That's not me calling anybody an imperialist or a neocon. And that's not me clobbering anybody over the head and telling them that I think they're a certain special kind of stupid evil. It's more just, here's a fascinating story about these people on the other side of the world about whom you might have had a totally different impression. And that, I think, actually does spark people's interest in getting more information.
That's interesting, because it occurs to me that when Iran is presented in a non-threatening way, it's through art. Like there's that famous graphic novel, is it Persepolis? Persepolis?
Persepolis.
Persepolis?
Marjan Satrapi is the author. Yeah, she's brilliant.
And when, what was it? On the Daily Show, when somebody said about comedy and politics, if you're going to tell people the truth, you better make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you. And
Might have been Chris Rock who said that.
I think it was farther back. It might have been Oscar Wilde. But I guess what strikes me is that, yeah, if you can come at them sideways, maybe there is hope that way.
Yeah, and I think it's also really important to recognize the cultural deterioration that is happening, but to not approach, the mass population as a group of people who are spiritually or intellectually inferior. I think that one of the things that I see a lot of people in the intelligentsia community doing is sort of like, dismissing the masses, and well, they just don't care, or they're not smart enough. And I really think there needs to be, on the part of the group of people who are trying to make this change and trying to allow for greater distribution of relevant information, there needs to be a willingness for them to actually try to understand then who it is that they're trying to distribute the information to, why it is that these people, who by and large aren't stupid and aren't bad, why it is that they're not interested, and then try to get them interested. Because I do feel that the sort of maybe a more elitist way of coming at it might be to just sort of be dismissive and critical. But I think inclusiveness is always the better option. And obviously, I'm one of these people that tends to be a little elitist, and I think I'm doing it right. Otherwise, I'd be doing it differently. So.
Well, and that's the thing. Everybody feels that way.
I think everybody does. I think by and large, most people, aren't sitting there like Mr. Burns with, the evil hands trying to figure out how to destroy the world. There are a couple of those, but most people are just trying to get through their day.
Unfortunately, I think the people who are polarizing, like whether it be Ahmadinejad or John McCain, who never saw a war he didn't like.
Which is so strange for a POW, right?
It is. He was at least he was against torture, and because that affected him personally. And maybe that gets back to this lack of empathy, because they have to experience it themselves before they're against it. It's like the senator or governor, I forget who it was, who once his son came out as gay, then he was pro-gay marriage.
Right.
Dick Cheney, same thing.
Sure.
And I think Rachel Maddow said something interesting on Bill Maher one night. She said, "What we need is for one of these high government officials to have a poor son."
Yeah, and that's the problem. That'll never happen. It's I do a lot of work in the homeless community for the homeless community in Chicago, and we had a fundraising event a few years ago where one of my dearest friends in the whole world had she was responsible primarily for the event actually, and she had just had a baby 2 weeks before the event, and she brought the baby to the event. And it was a 2 week old newborn infant, and she went up on the podium right before the main ask of the evening. We were asking people to give money, and she held her child up, and she basically talked about what a blessing it was to have this beautiful child that she can hold in her arms, and then she talked about how her child will never be homeless,
Mm.
and she won't. That is just a reality for that child. No matter what that child does in her life, she will never be homeless. But that is not a reality for a lot of other people, and it is extraordinarily difficult for those of us who have these um, incredible gifts in our lives to try to imagine what it might be like to not have them. But I also think it's a very human trait to stereotype, and it's a very human trait to polarize and to group people together. Disdain for the poor is unfortunately prevalent throughout the world.
Mm.
Um, More so, I think, in the United States recently than it had been several decades ago. But I don't think it's necessarily a new phenomenon. I think people like to think of their own gifts as something that they have worked hard for, as opposed to something that's been handed to them. Um, and they like to think of those who don't have them as blameworthy.
Mm.
And the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, right?
Well, I think I used to watch a reality show called Survivor, which I think might still actually be on TV. I'm just sure.
It is, yeah, it
But
is still on TV.
I learned something from Survivor, and that is that whoever wins, nobody ever says, "Yeah, I was lucky on like 57 occasions."
Hmm.
If
Right.
not, if I turned left instead of right, it just happened that way. I was just lucky. Nobody who's success. Well, I shouldn't say nobody. Very few people who are successful are that self-aware that they go, um, "Oh yeah, well, it might not have been me. It might not have been my genius and talent." Because other people have genius and talent, and they're not making it, right?
Right. I mean, I think that's right. I think it's particularly a prevalent way of being with men. Actually, Sheryl Sandberg talks about this in her book Lean In, where she talks about the difference between men and women in the corporate world, which is something I'm really very familiar with. And she says if you ask a woman who's succeeded in the corporate world, who's like a VP or a CEO or an equity partner in a large law firm, how'd you get here? They always say things like, well, I have a really supportive husband who really, helps out with the kids at home. And I had this professor in law school who did this, and I had this mentor. But if you ask a guy how they got the position of the CEO, they would say, well, listen, I'm just fucking awesome. I mean, I'm allowed to swear on your podcast, but that's how men think of themselves. I'm that smart. I'm that good. I'm that hardworking. And I did this. And I mean, she says it, obviously she's a little glib when she's saying it, but it certainly is a phenomenon that is incredible to observe. What I've seen is a lot of conservatives and a lot of people who tend to villainize the poor um, show disgust at what they term to be a sense of self entitlement that the poor have to services that they of course have to finance.
Meanwhile, give you
They
my corporate tax breaks.
Yeah, yeah, but what they never talk about is their own sense of self entitlement
Hmm.
as to everything that they have achieved. And what's worse, of course, than that is all the trust fund kids that grow up, remarkably wealthy and have a sense that they are entitled not just to cars and jewelry, but to an education at the best school in the city. Right now in the city of Chicago, I kid you not, most of my colleagues have their kids in private schools that cost as much as college,
Wow.
$25,000 a year for a 5-year old. I mean,
I'm
But
sorry, my head just exploded.
no, I mean it's a reality. It's a reality, and it's part of the reason is living in the city we don't have the greatest public schools here, but of course the solution to them is, well, I'll put my kid in private school, as opposed to, well, why don't we all work together to improve the public school system?
You know, there's something really stupid about that, and it's not what most people think is stupid. Let me use an analogy of housing. Shermin, I will give you $1 million house, or you can buy an $8 million house. And the cost benefit analysis that isn't happening is the $8 million house really 8 times better than the free house? That is $1 million value. I mean, how many more gold faucets and bathrooms add to your life? I, just, I for a 5-year-old to have $25,000 spent on them,
Mm-hmm.
I just think of whenever I see conspicuous consumption. Like I went to the Hearst Castle
Mm-hmm.
in California one time. It's amazing to see, and I also felt physically ill because of all the conspicuous consumption. There are
Sure.
earthen jars on a far shelf that you can stand behind a velvet rope, and you see these treasures from antiquity on a far shelf. You don't get a good look at them, and I think, wow, you really have to be quite a narcissistic asshole to think that this is a good thing you're doing for humanity,
Sure.
or
Sure.
even for yourself.
But it's actually an extraordinary challenge. I'll speak on behalf of myself alone, as somebody who is sort of living and working among the top, 0.5% of income earners in the United States.
Hmm.
You are in a culture, and it's extraordinarily difficult to fight the pushes and pulls of that culture. And my husband and I, find ourselves in this all the time.
My kids
I
want
know.
cell phones. I get that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, but it's worse than that. It's what neighborhood should we live in, or how big of a house should be bought? I mean, because when you can afford to get the best, but then you have to make choices on what does the best really mean. I mean, is
Hmm.
it really beneficial to your 5-year-old for them to be in a private school that costs that much? And what are they going to lose out on by being in such a school? And what culture are you infusing them into by placing them in such an institution? Now,
Actually, my wife is a school psychologist,
okay.
and one of the things she says about this is that if you control for all other factors that you can identify, the best thing you can do to help your child's education is to be in a better neighborhood. After that, everything else evens out.
Yeah, I think that's true, especially in urban living. That's definitely true. All of the elementary schools on the north side are fine. They're elementary school. I mean, especially when they are as young as 5, but even all the way through seventh and eighth grade, the schools are great. Good enough for a child of that age. And certainly, if you are, in the upper socioeconomic brackets, your child already has such an incredible heads up, even just by way of the vocabulary they're exposed to at home, or the books that are on the shelf, or the types of trips that they take with their parents, things that have absolutely nothing to do with their school, but that expose them to ideas and thoughts that they wouldn't otherwise have. But then the high school situation in Chicago is a little different. There's about 5 acceptable public high schools in the city, and they're all tested. So a lot of people in the city become obsessed about putting their children in the top rated elementary school, however it is that you can rate the top rated elementary schools, um, so that they could test into these top 5 high schools, because the other high schools are just such terrible learning institutions and make it very difficult for kids to actually get any sort of real college education following them. Or they move to the suburbs.
But there's
So,
a formula there that I don't understand in U.S. politics. Help me. And this is what it is. If your school tests well, they get more money. And this strikes me that if your school doesn't test as well, they need more resources, not less.
yeah,
So it's like there's this culture gap of everybody else is going to get turbocharged, and they pull away from the crowd, and everybody
right.
else is left behind for their school to burn in a post-apocalyptic wasteland. what is the rationale for that?
It's even worse than that. And the reason it's
It's worse.
worse
It's worse
is
than
that
a post-apocalyptic wasteland.
yes, because people cheat. Because people cheat. They cheat in two ways. There's been incident after incident reported where the teachers are faking the test scores, or, letting kids know in advance, or giving them a hint, or being very easygoing about the time limits, because everything in that school is going to depend on how these kids do on this test. So if we could just doctor it up just a tiny bit and improve our scores just a tiny bit. um, and then there are other schools who don't cheat, but who teach only to the test, so that
Yeah.
they basically learned, the top rated schools have learned how to prep their children to take these tests, which doesn't mean that they've learned how to teach their children. It just means they've learned how to teach their children to take these tests.
And before anybody listening to this gets too upset at those teachers, I think when you look at a paradigm that is unfair to you, that is out to screw you,
Right,
you'd cheat too.
right, right. It's the actual consequence of an unjust paradigm. I agree. I do agree with that.
Okay, I want to move on to.
Back to foreign politics.
Uh, okay, if you like. If you like. I was about to say the IRS scandal, but what
Yeah, let's talk about taxes. I love talking about
okay.
taxes.
Okay, with the IRS scandal, I think that personally, as a Canadian observer, uh, the president got it wrong. I think he should have gone on the counterattack and said, yeah, not only are we looking at all the right, all these organizations on the right, we should be looking at all these organizations on the left. If they claim tax exempt status that depends on them being non-political, and they're being political, then they shouldn't be political, and they should lose that status. Instead, he said, "Yeah, you got us, and we're looking into that." And I just don't think people are focusing on the real issue. And all those people who did get the Tea Party, it says party right in the Tea Party. It's a political party. All the people who focus on the Tea Party factions that got more scrutiny, they also got approved.
Right.
So
There's not a single organization that didn't get approval.
so where's the scandal?
Right. No, I mean, I think it is a little comical. Certainly, there does appear to be some involvement of politics in the additional scrutiny that was received by these organizations. However, that doesn't mean that it wasn't rationally related to the actual purpose of what the IRS is supposed to do. In other words, the Tea Party is sort of like has set themselves out to be this organization that is opposed to the United States tax laws. So it's not just about you're a Republican. It's more you've sort of self-identified with a movement that is opposed to U.S. tax laws, and you've also self-identified as a political movement. And if you self-identify at one of those two things, we're probably going to take a second look at your application, and maybe even a third look. So I mean, I absolutely agree with you. I think it is a bit much about to do about nothing. Um, at the same time, it is a little bit silly, because I think the main thing the president said is, well, gee whiz, I had no idea that this was going on, which I think actually makes it a little worse, because he's just saying it's not, yes, it's bad, although maybe not that bad, but really it's just that I'm uninformed about it. So you guys just need to sort of back off. And I think that's really the worst thing he could have done. I mean, the buck does stop with him, and I agree with you. He needs to sort of stand up there, take responsibility, and say, we certainly can't be discriminating against organizations that are affiliated with the right versus organizations that are affiliated with the left. And to the extent that that type of discrimination was going on, that is inappropriate. But if the quote unquote discrimination is really more of a rational one, which is, if you are an organization that self-identifies to be a group of people who are opposed to our tax laws and then are seeking tax exempt status, or an organization that in its name has self-identified as a political organization and are seeking tax exempt status as an organization that is supposed to be primarily an organization that promotes social welfare, then you will receive additional scrutiny, whether it's on the left or on the right. I think what was happening in this case, though, is only the ones on the right were receiving the additional scrutiny. Um, That might be because the ones on the left don't necessarily self-identify as organizations that are opposed to to the tax laws. So again, there
You
might
know,
have been a total rational reason for that.
I have a suspicion, and that is that what the White House has proven very reactionary to anything that Fox News says, and I wonder if their rationale was if if we go after these Tea Party factions, then Fox News will go on all day about black churches that uh, line up buses to get people to vote for Democrats. I wonder if that's what that's really about.
Maybe. Yeah, it's a good observation.
Well, I let's go to Benghazi.
Okay.
Why doesn't that matter?
So why do you? So obviously, whenever I assume you mean the loss of the 4 American lives in the embassy,
Well, loss of 4 American lives always matters,
right? Um,
but as far as it being a scandal where the White House gets roasted for it,
yeah,
where George Bush didn't get roasted, and he had, what was it, 50 attacks, 47 attacks on
sure.
U.S. embassies?
But I mean, this is obviously about Hillary Clinton, right? I mean, I don't even think it's about Barack Obama. I think it's about
Hmm.
Hillary Clinton, who most likely, maybe I'm being too ambitious, but I think most likely will be the next Democratic nominee for president, and who has been a favorite among the Obama White House, even among conservatives. A lot of my conservative friends and family who can't stand Barack Obama or anybody else in the White House or anybody else in the Senate or any other Democrat in Congress will still say, but that Hillary Clinton, she's doing a good job. And I've been hearing that from people, and that's dangerous, right? If you're conservative. Um, so I mean, I think it's all about Hillary, and it's about discrediting Hillary. I don't know how effective it's been. It's certainly created a lot of noise, but it does appear to me that the recipients of the noise tend to be those who would have been the noisy ones to begin with anyway. I don't really see the attempt at creating a scandal there where really none exists as persuading those in the middle, the independents, the libertarians, to be very critical of Hillary Clinton. But that does appear to be the attempt
Well,
to sway the next presidential election.
um, the Speaker of the House brought up Benghazi just today as we were recording this, or is it yesterday? Um, it seems like a lot of people have moved on from Benghazi, but it just struck me that her election is 3.5 years away.
Yeah.
So there are things that have happened in the past with Hillary Clinton where I think when that gets brought up, that does raise some questions in people's mind. And actually, the only thing that I remember is where she claimed to be running from a plane under sniper fire, and Sinbad, the comedian, said, "No, you weren't." So that struck me as weird and self-aggrandizing, but it's really the only thing. I mean, people will bring up the Clinton scandals from the past. Whitewater didn't go anywhere, and really, Monica Lewinsky, that wasn't Hillary, and it's a tragic, silly bit of nonsense about impeaching a president.
Hmm.
Um, it seems like if it seems like the Republicans, as a Canadian observer, I see people who don't have ideas. What they have is a campaign to delegitimize anybody who isn't them.
Well, I wouldn't say that they don't have ideas. I do certainly think that this campaign exists. I mean, I think the election's probably it's probably actually 2.5 years away,
Mm.
but the campaigning obviously is going to start well before that, probably within a year. And we're going to start to see potential Republican nominees, and of course the determination of who the Republican nominee um, is going to be a significant component of press throughout 2014 and most of 2015. So I think that the time will creep up on us much faster than we think it will because of the nature of American politics and because of the nature of American campaigns, especially presidential campaigns. I promise you this will be a big issue in the 2016 campaign if Hillary is indeed the Democratic nominee.
That's so hard to believe. I just feel
Yeah.
when I say that, not that I do believe Hillary will be the nominee, but what's hard to believe is that they're going to get any traction out of it. Bob Dole just yesterday or the day before said that the Republican Party needs to put a close for renovation sign up because they need to focus inside, not out, and casting aspersions.
Right. I do. I think that's certainly true. The Republican Party is suffering from a great disadvantage right now, I think, and that is the Tea Party. The Tea Party, which really helped it for a while, I think is really hurting it now. Michelle Bachmann's decision to not run for office again, I think, is very helpful to the Republican Party. I think they have quite a few people there, up there on Capitol Hill, that are rogues and are not really a part of the Republican establishment and don't want to play nice with the Republican establishment.
Mm.
And they're really hurting the Republican establishment. I actually think the Tea Party helped Barack Obama's reelection probably more than any other fact.
Mm.
Because, again, the question in American politics is the folks in the middle. Who can you persuade and how can you persuade them? Because the folks on the far right and the folks on the far left, it doesn't matter. You can scream and shout all you want about all the scandals that you think exist or that maybe actually exist on either side. It doesn't matter. They're going to vote how they're going to vote. It's the libertarians, the independents, the Green Party folks. Those are the people that are really going to matter. And the Tea Party, I think, has really been hurting the Republican establishment in that respect. In fact, one of the tenets of the Republican Party for decades and decades has been governmental non involvement in the personal lives of Americans. One of the reasons why they are so fiscally conservative is that they believe, as a party, as an institution, that there needs to be a greater level of libertarianism in the United States, which is in stark contrast to, of course, the progressive movement. But it's also in stark contrast to a lot of positions taken by the Tea Party, because the Tea Party is very conservative in a religious sense, which, again, definitely helped Bush a couple of times, but has really started, I think, to hurt the party. I know a lot of Republicans who would consider themselves fiscal conservatives, but social liberals or at least social libertarians, and they are offended by several people in the Republican Party throughout the country and their discussions of rape or women's rights or gay rights or minority rights or immigrants' rights. And this has been a problem that if they want to succeed in the next presidential election, that they really need to address. They need to control their own folks.
Well, there's so much alienation of minorities, particularly Hispanics and blacks, felt so disenfranchised from the Republican Party in the last election. I I just can't see how what their path to victory could be at this point for the
Yeah,
next
I mean,
election.
I think they think their path to victory might be Marco Rubio or, somebody who is a Hispanic, maybe being their nominee. But of course, the real reason they're losing the Hispanic vote, which is a real concern for them, since there's a lot of Hispanics that are voting nowadays,
Mm-hmm.
is the immigration issue. Hispanics do actually tend to be fiscally conservative. They tend to be socially conservative. They tend to be Catholics. They tend to be, pro-life and anti-abortion, and they actually have a lot of things in common with the Republican Party. But it's really just the immigration issue. So a lot of speculators would say that if the Republican Party can rein in their position on immigration or try to find some sort of middle ground and then put a minority candidate up, that maybe they'll be able to battle that.
But
Some
wasn't their recent grand compromise was that they were talking about a 17-year path to citizenship?
It's not a path. I mean, the compromise is the road to hell. I mean, it's and I don't really have enough knowledge to go into it in incredible detail, but based on what I know, it's literally impossible. to actually be on this path. So it's really just jargon. And it is, I think it's an unfortunate tactic because I think those who are promoting it are thinking that the recipients of the message are illiterate or stupid, but they're not. And they're going to see right through this and they're going to see that this is not a real path. But they've got some time. Right now, really, they're just working on their rhetoric. They've got some time to come up with some actual legislation or an actual messaging system that will be effective in persuading the recipients of the message or the voters. But I still don't think that's going to get him there. I mean, I think the Latino vote was a significant component of the 2012 election, certainly. But I think a bigger component was the millions of white men who didn't vote. I mean, there was tons of them, and nobody talks about this. I don't know why.
This is the
I mean,
first time I've thought about it or heard about it. Go on.
there was
What's going on here?
yeah, I mean, it's a huge, huge component of white men who just didn't vote because they're not excited about the Democrats. They're not excited about Barack Obama, but they're turned off about these crazies on Capitol Hill that are talking about, rape as not being a real thing. And while that doesn't represent the entire Republican Party, and it really doesn't, it's actually anti-establishment, it certainly changed the messaging in such a way as to turn off so many people that would otherwise have voted for John McCain. So,
You know what?
you know,
I think you've just clarified something in my mind. Is there was one of my favorite Facebook memes of the last year was a woman holding up a sign in protest, and it was pro birth control, and underneath there was a little note that said, "I can't believe I have to fight for this shit all over again."
well, it's actually interesting because the far, far, far right conservatives have done a brilliant job of changing the discussion level. So one of the things, I'm an attorney, and one of the things that we do as attorneys is we engage in a tremendous amount of negotiations. In a negotiation, the most important thing is determining the playing field, right? I mean, so if I think my client's entitled to $16 million and you think my client's entitled to $250,000 and we come to a negotiation table, the most effective thing I can possibly do is create a situation where the negotiations begin at the 8-figure level.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've already won,
Yeah.
right? So what they've done is they've moved the line of negotiation from abortion to contraceptives. And by moving the line where we're now actually having discussions about whether or not people ought to be entitled or their health insurance programs ought to be required to cover contraceptives, the abortion thing almost seems like of course you can't have abortions. I mean, you can't even get contraceptives. They've completely changed the discussion or where the discussion is taking place. And it's been brilliant. I mean, I actually think they did a great job. it's
Well,
it's obviously it
but
goes
it
against
backfired.
everything I morally believe in, but
But it backfired, right? Because all those white men said, "You're going to make me have babies? I don't want to have any more babies. I want to have some more free sex before I have the babies."
I do think that in the presidential election, in the last presidential election, it backfired. Obviously, as far as the congressional and senatorial elections were concerned, the Republicans do have a much greater stronghold now than they did when President Obama first began his first term. And maybe that's the real issue. I mean, the question is, did it backfire in terms of the impact on Obama? I think you're right that it did. What effect, however, has it had on the actual legislation concerning women and reproductive rights? And that's been a very, very negative effect. Unfortunately, women are in the United States have consistently over the last 15 years lost and lost and lost and lost and lost, and their reproductive rights have been chipped away consistently. And getting that back, I think, is going to have to require a change in the way that we actually discuss those rights.
It does disappoint me that we're talking so much about the Tea Party, and yet the Occupy movement we're not talking about that.
Yeah, I think that movement has no real representation in government. And that movement suffered from, I mean, we can say it suffered from lack of organization or lack of leadership, but I think it's easy to say that about the Tea Party movement as well. But the Tea Party movement found politicians with which to affiliate itself, whereas the Occupy movement rejected all politicians. And while that might have been a noble, moral position to take, it's not an effective one if you're trying to create political change.
Hmm. Yeah, I think what they need to do is get elected and subvert from within. Uh, so,
Or just align themselves with politicians. I mean, I think they distinctly took the position that they're against the entire political establishment, and as a result, they can't find any political representation. And unfortunately, in the way in which this, or maybe fortunately, the way in which this society is structured is if you have no political representation, your political movement ain't going to go nowhere.
I thought that I understood why they did what they did, and in principle, I think in a lot of ways it was effective for the short term. In the long term, I think they should have got right in the back of Elizabeth Warren's bus.
Elizabeth Warren. Yeah, I knew you were going. I knew you were going towards Elizabeth Warren, and they have, to some extent they have. I mean, Elizabeth Warren is getting lots of traction on Facebook and Twitter and social media, and a lot of progressives are madly in love with Elizabeth Warren, and a lot of Occupy people will, post her positions repeatedly and discuss her positions. But Elizabeth Warren is one person. I mean, the
Hmm.
the Tea Party movement has tens of people representing them, and they had really aggressive personalities like Sarah Palin
Hmm.
representing them. And that's really what you need, somebody who's in people's faces when you're seeking a counter revolution.
I guess so. It's so frustrating when I see what Elizabeth Warren is doing. And I've had I have a couple of conservative friends where we'll we it's gotten to the point where we don't talk politics anymore. But to be honest, but when we did, they would come at me with something, and I would pound them into the ground with facts. And when I see Elizabeth Warren, I see the same thing happening. Going, how can somebody be that right and not everybody go, yeah, well, she's right. It doesn't seem like a debate comes to any admissions of, yeah, you got a good point there, and I concede anymore. It's if you say that, I'll say what I'm saying, but I'm going to do it louder.
Yeah. I think that many of us are guilty of this, including myself. I mean, I think it's so difficult with politics and with religion, which is why people don't talk about those things at dinner parties. For anybody on either side to admit that they're wrong about anything, and for the debate to actually take the form of a factual discussion as opposed to a moral one, which I see people on both sides engaging in. Or a emotional one, which I also see people on both sides engaging in, and it's unfortunate. I mean, I think that if really we could try to just stick to the facts as opposed to name calling one another, that we would get a lot more done and a lot more accomplished. But maybe it's just the passionate nature of religion and politics, and the fact that politics is, for many, if not most, intertwined with morality, that it becomes extraordinarily difficult to concede that you're wrong, because then you would have to say that you were being a bad person.
Mm. I
And
think it's a
that's very
tribal
hard
thing.
for
Yeah,
people to do.
it's a tribal thing, but and that's in the genes. But to get back to that I talked about disconnection earlier. I think a lot of what we're talking about comes down to a disconnection. Um, Getting back to, for instance, Iran and the United States,
Hmm.
those governments have problems with each other. But this is what we need to make the connection is when you talk about, not you, when John McCain talks about bombing Iran, or when Warhawks talk about bombing Iran, these attacks, they're talking about uh, a educated populace, a
Hmm.
big populace,
Right.
and the thing is, I don't think the average American would have a problem with the average Iranian. They would have a lot in common. A lot of them are poor on both sides. A lot
Hmm.
of them don't like their governments on both sides.
Sure.
They that they share a common culture of poverty and disenfranchisement and frustration and trying to get their kids into school.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that's absolutely right. There was, right after 9/11, a difference that I certainly noticed. I mean, I was I had just graduated from University of Michigan Law School with a 3.79 GPA, and I got some great job offers, but I was still turned down from places that I shouldn't have been turned down from. And I think a lot of that had to do with being from Iran. I literally had people ask me, "Where are you from?" And when I said I'm from Iran, they would literally, and this is not an exaggeration, take a step back and sort of wrinkle their face and maybe even, say something like, "Oh, because and that was a reality. I don't think that reality has persisted. Uh, I do think that peoples, when at war, confuse all kind of issues with one another. And certainly 9/11, because Americans are so unaccustomed to being attacked on their own soil, really shook people to the core, and they really didn't know how to respond to this threat that they felt and the fear that they felt. Imagine living in the Middle East, or imagine having rockets fall on your head left, right, and center all the time, what you must go through. But at least those folks who live under that kind of threat all the time, at least they have some idea as to how to respond to it, or how to distinguish where it is the threat's coming from versus where it is it's not coming from. But I think in America, it was just so new and so novel and so frightening that so many people took extreme positions. And it took a lot for the culture to shift. But I think it has, by and large. I mean, certainly my own personal experience as an Iranian is no longer that. Now, being Iranian it's almost kitschy. Like people want you at their dinner table, the way they want a black gay couple at their dinner table, so that they can say, "Oh, look at me! Aren't I such a fancy, open-minded person that I have these people at my dinner table?"
I just
And
got
then,
suddenly self-conscious about asking you on the Cool People podcast.
It's funny, but it's true. It's become like a thing. Oh, I have a friend and she's from Iran. Aren't I cool? But I think that's great. I think that's great. I'm not trying to criticize that, and I don't mind fulfilling that role in whatever capacity I can. And that has been an interesting shift, and for me.
Yeah. Well, we're running out of time, and you need
Yes.
to educate me about the Russian-Israeli Syria triangle and Iranian elections, because I what what I know mostly about Israeli policy is that it is debated fiercely in Israel, and that is not allowed in the United States of America. so
Yeah.
so
Well, the only thing that's not allowed in the United States of America, of course, is a debate with respect to Israeli policy as it relates to the Palestinian conflict. And that's a huge product of AIPAC, and AIPAC's influence on Capitol Hill. But the real interesting thing that's going on with Israeli politics right now, not to, of course, never to minimize the conflict with the Palestinian people, but I mean, the Israeli defense minister bluntly threatened the Russian Federation earlier this week, saying that if Moscow went through with its plan to send the S-300 air defense system to Syria, that Israel would bomb the arrays. And this is a really fascinating dynamic, because you've got
uh,
the
I'm
Russians
sorry, they would bomb what?
bomb the arrays.
The
The
arrays.
the S-300 is an air defense system that the Russians have promised the Syrians, and the Russians, of course, are loyal to the Bashar regime. It's one of their biggest clients, and not at all interested in destabilizing that regime, and are continuing to fund and provide weaponry to that regime. By the way, that's a regime that's killed 80,000 people and cost millions of refugees and people to be homeless. But apparently, funding that regime does not constitute terrorism. I don't know why not, but apparently it doesn't in international dialogue.
Let's take a
Uh,
moment. Let's just pause just a moment to do a face palm together. Okay, you may
Yeah, I
continue.
don't. I won't even talk about that, but because it's such a source of frustration to me. So the Russians have said, listen, we have a contract with these guys. We're going to maintain our contract with these guys, and we're going to give them this air defense system, particularly as the EU has been debating, and I think they actually just decided to not extend the weapons ban on Syria. And the failure to extend the weapons ban on Syria means the failure to extend a weapons ban on the rebels. That's a really significant thing to understand. So that there are several countries now that basically want to take the position that if they want to, they should be allowed to arm the rebels. And the Russians are very angry about this. And as a result, are proceeding with their plan to provide a defense system and other weaponry to the Assad al-Bashar regime, and it's really pissing off the Israelis because the Israelis, of course, don't want this regime to stay in power, but even more significantly than that, are really afraid of these weapons falling into the hands of Al Qaeda affiliate Nusra Front or Hezbollah, which, interestingly enough, Hezbollah has taken the position that it is pro-regime, which has been, what's going on there is so complex, but basically most Sunni Muslims are in favor of the rebel movements because the rebel movement is primarily a Sunni movement versus the older establishment, which is an Alawite movement. But Hezbollah has taken the position that it supports the Alawites, which is fascinating. So by arming the Alawites, you're kind of arming Hezbollah, which is a tremendous threat to Israel. So, and of course, you're funding terrorism against tens of thousands of civilians. And there's this crazy dynamic going on right now. And it scares me, to be honest with you, because this rhetoric. Now, the Israeli defense minister is a little crazy. He has said things after he aligned himself with the Likud party that are so offensive. Called the Palestinians a cancer. He said Israel had to consider killing Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. He's erratic. He's a hothead. He's a little nuts. So on some level, everybody kind of takes him with a grain of salt, and some people don't really listen to the things that come out of his mouth. But he is the Israeli defense minister, and he has told the Russians that he'll bomb their arrays if they try to hand them over to the Syrians, and that is talk towards a potential war between the Soviets and the Israelis, or at a minimum tensions that we really haven't seen for a long time anywhere in that region.
Are they talking about bombing the arrays before they get to Syria?
He wasn't clear, but even if they do it after they get to Syria, the systems are going to be accompanied by Russian experts. So, obviously they want to prevent the shipment. So if an Israeli strike on the shipment would actually kill Russian personnel. So it's not necessarily that they would strike Russia or the Russian Federation, but that they would destroy the arrays en route. Now, having said that, Bashar al-Assad just suggested, I think last night, that they had received the first shipment of the Russian air defense system. He was speaking to Al-Manar TV, which is a Hezbollah-linked press outlet, and he confirmed that his administration was in negotiations with Russia for many other types of weaponry as well. So, who knows? Maybe this is just rhetoric on the part of the Israelis, but the reality is the Israelis are facing a real and genuine threat. And I don't think they can I don't think they will kind of sit idly by. They can complain about Iran all they want. This is a real threat. I don't think they're going to... Sorry, go ahead.
I want to get this in before we're out of time, because I find that often it's like when you go to the doctor and you go, should I worry about this? And he goes, oh, no, you shouldn't worry about this. You should be worrying about this. So never mind that little bump. What about your blood pressure? So, like, for instance, North Korea. Every year, North Korea, every spring, we hear more about North Korea because there are exercises off their war exercises off their coast, and China pulled North Korea back. I'm not really worried about North Korea. I think they are a pebble in a hollow bucket. You know what I'm saying? It's a lot of noise, but I'm not too worried about them. But if you had to rank where the threats are, like when I think of the Middle East, I worry about Pakistan. Uh, I got to get this in. When Osama bin Laden was killed, there was a doctor, a Pakistani doctor,
Sure.
who identified him by his DNA. He was this undercover guy who worked for a CIA operative as I recall. But the story was he was there to inoculate children, and he got a hold of DNA. So said, yes, that's not a Osama bin Laden clone or imposter. That is the guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then they got Osama bin Laden, and that doctor is now in a Pakistani prison for embarrassing the regime.
Right.
And it's like he is invisible. It's like he never existed. You heard about it for a couple days, and nobody's saying, Pakistan, it would really help U.S.-Pakistani relations if you let that guy out.
Right. I mean, my understanding is that there is that discussion at a very high level behind closed doors. Certainly, it's nowhere in the media. We're not seeing any sort of public campaign on the part of Americans to free this doctor. Zero Dark 30 didn't cover his participation. People don't really seem to be aware of it as a general matter, though there does seem to be very high level discussions between the administration and the Pakistani leadership, which is such an abstract entity anyway, to try to get this guy out. I don't know how they'll succeed. I mean, to answer your question as to what it is that we should and shouldn't be afraid of, I think instability is the scariest thing. So North Korea, yeah, those guys are crazy. They scare the bejesus out of me. I mean, the Iranian government's crazy too. I mean, I'm not saying they're not. I'm not saying I'm in favor of the Iranian government. I hate those guys. But whenever you have some level of stability, it makes you less afraid. The North Koreans wouldn't engage in an all-out war with South Korea because it would mean their annihilation. That, I think, is a rational belief. So they could have all the rhetoric they want, which may or may not be designed to shore up their own internal politics. But at the end of the day, we can call them crazy in everyday vernacular. But they're not really crazy, right? They're not really irrational actors. They don't want to completely destroy themselves. And I think the same is true of the Iranians. I think maybe what's scary about Pakistan right now and what scares me about Syria right now is the instability. I mean, the internal domestic politics in Pakistan are a total and complete mess, and but again, even scarier to me is Syria because we don't know what's going to happen. And when you have rogue actors that aren't controlled by the state, a lot of people were actually saying this about Iraq. A lot of people were saying, well, not only should we not invade Iraq because they had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11, and not only should we not invade Iraq because it's going to mean hundreds of thousands of civilian deaths, and not only should we not invade Iraq because it's going to cost billions of dollars. It's also going to create tremendous instability in the region because not to say that anybody has love for Saddam Hussein, but that dictator was real good at containing the civil war that would have erupted as a result of the warring factions in Iraq. And so from a not moral, but rather geopolitical, we are, warlords of the universe trying to keep the world stable point of view, destabilizing the regime destabilized Iraq, which resulted in a great deal of danger to the region. I don't know how much danger it poses to America, but to the region certainly it does.
Well, I guess whenever I think about what happened after 9/11, I think the fact is Osama bin Laden said we're going to pull them into a war that they can't afford. And doing what your enemy wants you to do seems to me to be a really bad strategy.
Yeah.
But what's interesting, and we'll wrap it up on this because I know you got to go. I have an obsession with symmetry. And when I asked you at the beginning, how can we make things change? You said, instability. And at the end of the interview, I said, what's the major worry? You said, Instability.
And if you remember, I said instability, but that's the last thing anybody would want.
Yes, yes. I'm not trying to catch you out. I'm just saying that in order for things to change, there has to be a degree of instability.
Yeah.
And inevitably there will be, but if I just when I look at all these problems, I think if these people just had a little more empathy for each other, because I think you're on the right track as far as trying to get the cultures together, because the governments seem to be out to butt heads.
Yeah.
And what's the organization you're involved with? What's the name of it?
Passvarda Arts and Cultural Exchange.
Okay.
And one of the things that every time I get an opportunity to address our audiences, one of the things I encourage people to do is, if you're single, go out and find a Persian girl or a Persian boy to date.
They do have lovely eyelashes.
Family to befriend. It's, turn around and kiss the person standing next to you. It sounds a little shallow, but I think that really just extend a hand, make a friendship, go on a date, grab a drink.
You big hippie.
No one has accused me of being a hippie before as a corporate commercial litigator. But I think these things, they sound so small, but human connection, like actually touching someone or looking into someone's eyes, and someone who you might otherwise reject, like somebody who is wearing a headscarf, somebody who you might otherwise label. Somebody a lot more conservative than you, somebody a lot more progressive than you, somebody with a different skin color. Just talk to them. Open up a dialogue, open up a conversation. These opportunities are there, and not just in Chicago. They really do exist. Interfaith organizations exist all over the country and all over the United States and Canada as well. Intercultural organizations. Or just, get up and go to a party being hosted by a different community and see how you're received. I think you'll be surprised, and not just by how warmly you'll be received, but by the friendships that you will make and how much you will change and how much you will in turn change others. Because I do think a lot of the biases do go both ways. It is different, however, when you are the person in power. And I mentioned that a little bit earlier. I'm not saying that there's no Iranians who are racist or bigots or sexist, but it is a little bit different when the most powerful, the strongest, the wealthiest, and the one with the greatest ability to effectuate change, where it be good or bad, suffers from those human flaws. So I'm not trying to cast a stone upon, white Americans as devils. I don't think that they are. I think by and large Americans are very, very good people. But I do think that there is a greater sense of responsibility when you are in a position of power to be the first person to extend your arm and be open to change and be open to changing others through that dynamic.
Well, send me the link and I'll put that in the show notes at coolpeoplepodcast.com. Shermin, you know what this means now that you've been my guest on the Cool People Podcast?
I think it means I figured out how to make Skype work, which is probably more than I could have ever hoped for.
Yes, there's that. It also means that you're cool.
I'll tell my husband. He doesn't believe it.
Oh, well, once he hears this podcast, he will believe. Thank you for being my guest on the Cool People Podcast. I've been talking to Shermin Kruse of Chicago, and you can check out all her, the link and all her information at coolpeoplepodcast.com.